Hello, my name is Dan Stanton, and I am the managing editor of BioProcess Insider, an online publication that covers the biomanufacturing and bioprocessing world. I am delighted to be talking to Andy Mears, the CEO and co-founder of Lead Candidate, a recruitment firm within the life sciences space. Andy, welcome.
Dan, thank you. It's great to talk to you. And yeah, looking forward to chatting.
So I believe we first spoke a couple of years ago at CPHI in Milan.
We did.
At the time, I think you just set up Lead Candidate,
Yeah.
and you were kind of telling me all these interesting things about what made you set up Lead Candidate and what you could offer the life science space in terms of recruitment. Do you want to very quickly sort of tell me where you came from and what led you to bring Lead Candidate to the market?
Yeah, no, of course. So my background, broadly speaking, is I left university a long, long time ago. Had a career as a human resources generalist. So worked in big professional services firms like EY, and then moved into subcontract manufacturing, but specifically within the automotive industry. Worked my sort of way up to be head of human resources for a division of a business, and then I decided to specialize in talent and talent acquisition. So I moved into consultancy world, and that's where I've spent the thick end of 20 years, working all over the world, working with a variety of different industry sectors, but all with a sort of similar theme, and the theme being that they've got a change agenda, and to realize that change agenda, talent and talent acquisition play fundamental parts of what that is, and achieving their goals. So that's my sort of my potted history, what led me to Lead Candidate, creating Lead Candidate. So I've known my two co-founders, Fiona Cruikshank and Roman Segal, for 10, 12 years. I've always followed what Roman was doing, in particular in his organization, Remarketing, working with the pharma and bio outsourcing space. Always found it very interesting, but very akin to many of the industries that I'd worked in previously. And he came to me 3 years ago and said, listen, I've got this idea. There's a real issue with talent and talent acquisition. The clients I work with are either finding it really hard to keep their people, or they're finding it really hard to find their people. And I'm continually hearing this, and there just doesn't seem to be a proposition in the market that looks after the interests of these businesses on an ongoing basis. They all seem to be very transactional and very focused on what's your immediate need, fill that immediate need, move on. And the cost associated with that kind of model was just continuing to get inflated because of ultimately the shortages of supply of talent. And that's ultimately where Lead Candidate came from, was from the feedback that we were taking from those businesses.
And just those businesses. I mean, I know Raman's business focused on the sort of the CDMO, the services space, and the pharma side of things. So, is that where the shortage was? Because I'm always hearing about shortage across the whole biopharma spectrum, but you're specifically talking on the services side here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we are, yes, but the feedback you hear, Dan, is absolutely right. This is not something that is unique to this part of the life sciences ecosystem. It's pretty much consistent. Well, it is consistent across the board in the life sciences industry. There was some data that I read this week that came out from Mass Bio, from research they had done. But life sciences employment between the mid noughties up to 2021 has grown by 131% in the US alone. I mean, that's astronomical growth. And yeah, that kind of challenge, that kind of growth leads to problems if you haven't got a talent supply chain set up to be able to navigate that. You're going to struggle.
So really, are we just take it to basic economics, if I can remember my A levels? Is it really just a supply demand issue at the moment, or not just at the moment, for the past 20 years or so, where there are just such a demand across all sectors within biopharma, to so many jobs available, and just the workforce is minimal? Is that the case?
Listen, at the very top level, yes, it is a supply demand challenge. But there are a number of factors that have impacted that, which I think have created a perfect storm. And those factors, if you permit me, are at the one end, we've got less of the younger generation, we've had less of the younger generation getting interested in science and technology and engineering and mathematics, the STEM subjects. And that's led to a shortage of talent coming out of the university and academia and moving into the kind of the start of the food chain, if you will, the entry level of the food chain. The industry's experienced double-digit growth year on year for the last decade. So you've got demand for jobs, less people coming in at the sort of entry level. That puts pressure on. People, perhaps aren't seeing the career progression within their organizations, so they've got choice and they move on. And you just get this continuous churn of people because you haven't got that. The other problem we've had is that the industry, in my opinion, hasn't kept pace with some of the other industries that have started to take the same talent. So the technology industries, some of the big data science industries are taking the same talent that our industry wants. So we're losing out to other industries as well now, whereas traditionally we hadn't really lost out to other industries. We are losing out to other industries now.
So traditionally, this industry is very slow at adapting, at evolving, and in this case, you're sort of saying it's shot itself in the foot here because some very good workers, some very good talent across the board are moving to those other sectors.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
What about on the manufacturing side? Years ago, I was writing about small molecules because that was the market. And as biologics and more complicated drugs came along, there was a real problem with getting the expertise to make and to control these more complicated molecules. And then obviously biologics are kind of staple now, but we're looking at even more complicated modalities, cell and gene, mRNA and such. So it just each of these different levels of complexity, it's not transferable, is it?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? And it's that increased complexity and albeit we're sort of talking about the slow to adopt, and our industry works at the cutting edge of science and innovation, but in some of the infrastructure type practices that need to support that level of cutting edge work just don't move at the same level of innovation. And just to be clear, if I think about sort of, listen, I'm sat here now and I'm the chief executive of a business that recruits talent within the industry. We are not the solution. The recruitment industry is not the solution to this problem. This is a problem that's multifaceted, that's got lots of things that need to be addressed. So you're right, that complexity has also had an issue. There is a degree of transferability, but it comes with a learning curve. And my view is that again, kind of, sort of we're not the solution to the problem, because in reality, all we're going to do is just keep moving the labor around. We need more people coming into the industry, not just at the ground level, so straight out of university and straight into careers, but coming in at different levels from different industries. So I think we need to be looking at how do we partner with academia to create conversion programs? How do we look at like industries and try and give people the opportunity to translate their skills that they have into our industry? I think that's the level of innovation we need to be thinking of now. Otherwise, we're going to have a real problem.
And that, I guess, that has to come from the industry itself. I know there have been projects in the past where big pharma specifically have tapped different areas. I think Pfizer was infamous for tapping the US military for a while to bring in the expertise needed in their facilities. Then, of course, you've got kind of the government-backed, the NIBRTs, the Jefferson Institutes, who are kind of big on training. These are all they all sound positive from a news perspective, but are they actually, are they just tapping away at the surface here, or are these sort of schemes just far too few and far too rare? to make a big difference?
Yeah, I think that is the problem. Unfortunately, it's just the scalability of them. And if you're a CDMO based out in the Midwest, you're not going to be able to partner with those institutions. So you've got to look for alternatives. So I know some really exciting, innovative CDMOs operating in the large molecule biologic space who have partnered with community colleges, with local universities to develop programs that actually give people, that knowledge and expertise to at least be able to function in a laboratory. Because there's one human resources director said to me this week, candidly, where we are based, there isn't anyone to go and pick this kind of stuff from. We don't have it, so we have to grow our own. We have no choice. We have to grow our own. We can't just do that, and that's what they've done. So they've developed different tiers of programs, and to the point where they're actually supporting people through to degree programs and bachelor programs once they've gone through the transition. But they've gone and done it. We need all these businesses to be thinking like that, and I think it's always better if you've got a region where there's a hub, a life sciences hub. It's let's pool that collective resource, because that's the other thing I find is, especially in the US, but I think it's the same in most of the countries where we operate. It's very silo oriented. People are, they will concentrate on themselves or their local regions, but they don't talk to what's going on in the wider world. And as a result, I just don't think they're learning from what their peers are doing in different parts of the world, and I think they've got a lot to benefit from doing that.
And what about what about governments specifically? Are you seeing any sort of positive actions from regions, from countries? I know there's a few weeks ago in the UK, where we're both from, there was a big push to encourage more, school age children to move specifically into STEM over perhaps arts or anything else. I mean, I'm not going to use this platform to be critical of the UK government, but I'm wondering if governments are actually just blowing hot air, if they're actually trying to promote the science element, trying to sell up systems. We mentioned NIBRT before, which seems to be a fairly sort of successful element in Ireland to kind of retrain the workforce for biologics and now cell and gene. But what are you kind of seeing? What are you kind of hearing?
I think there's, you've got the catapults who operate in the UK as an example, and they do great work, and they try to be that link and sort of conduit between academia, between different businesses, then between the wider catapult network, because you have the catapult for advanced manufacturing, you have a catapult for cell and gene therapy, you have a catapult for offshore renewable energy, and you've got all those catapults trying to kind of pool that resource. But again, it's not enough, candidly. I think schools and colleges and academia are doing more than they did, but we're going to have a latent period, because it's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. This has been this reduction has been happening for years, and so just putting these initiatives in now is not just going to be a magic solution to the problem. There's going to be an evolution in the other way now, and that's going to take time, and that's not going to, that pace of change is, without more investment, without more resources, without more support from at a government level, it's not going to keep pace with the rate of change. And that's so this problem's not going anywhere. This problem is going to be a decade in the fixing.
So companies and governments can plant seeds now, but it is going to be a long time till we see those plants grow. On the other side of things, there clearly is a workforce at the moment. The drugs are being produced, research is being carried out, pipelines are sort of progressing through the clinic. So things do seem to be moving along, but there is a big issue of retention. When, again, this goes back to simple supply and demand, when there are so many jobs that need filling, and so many companies, especially within clusters, looking at their rivals, looking at who they can pick off. people don't stay with the same company anymore. I
Yeah.
get press release after press release saying so and so has moved from so and so. I'm thinking they've only been there 6 months,
6 months.
and that's got to be beneficial for the workers at the moment, but again, not for the long term ambition of the industry.
No, absolutely not. And again, this might appear or sound like I'm being slightly counterintuitive as a someone who works in the recruitment industry. So you would say, well, surely if there's good attrition and turnover of staff, that's a good thing for the recruitment world. Well, yes, but it only gets you so far, because ultimately, if you if that retention problem remains a problem, it will stagnate businesses' growth. That will be, quite often we'll talk with chief executives and ask what their number one inhibitor to their growth is, and they will tell you it's the ability to acquire and then retain the talent we need to deliver the science that we need to deliver, and it is that is stopping them, amongst other things, availability to funding and such like. So the retention thing, and to put too fine a point on it, the very simple headline is it's far more cost effective for any organization in terms of their productivity, in terms of pure cash out the door, to retain the people that they hire and work with them and develop them and grow them and keep them in the organization than it is to keep hiring people. There is so much money lost because of high turnover. And I think I told you recently in a conversation, some of the data that we see, on average, 2 in 5 people leave a company within the first 18 months. That's 40% of a workforce. And I think it's something like 70% of the workforce today globally is looking to change jobs during 2023 and 2024. So again, the retention problems aren't going anywhere, but businesses have got to be tuned into this. They've got to be tuned in that they've got to keep their people in the organization, and they've got to hire the right people in the first place to then keep them in the organization.
I mean, is that the key then, hiring the right people? Because even then, when the scales are so unfairly balanced here, that right person could be offered another 20, 30, 40 grand from the people next door, because that they are the right person there as well. So it's really
I think yeah
I
buyer's
should
market.
have been I should never been I should never have been a journalist. I should have been a bioprocess engineer, because I would have been a lot richer and a lot more mobile. But hey, we all make decisions when we're young. But yeah, tell me.
You make a point. You make a really valid point, and we see time and time again that people typically don't leave companies because they are incapable of doing their job. The level of qualification, the level of technical experience is phenomenal in this industry. People typically leave because there's something about the company, there's something about the people they work for, there's something about the culture, the values, that just doesn't connect with that person. And that is really common in a marketplace where you've got incredibly high demand for particular technical qualification and skill. People focus far too much on their capability, and they forget about their sort of cultural fit and values alignment. It's something we realized really quickly that was a big problem, and that we actually had a role to play with. So in answering your question, is recruitment, hiring the right people, the solution to that problem? It's certainly a positive influencer. So what we encourage our customers to do, and the people that we work with who are hiring, is you need to think much further beyond their capability. We need to think about what's the kind of person that's going to do well in your team, what's the kind of person that's going to really align with your value structure and the culture in the business. So there's a really good fit to the organization that's way beyond their technical capabilities and scientific knowledge, or whatever it may be. So we find that then delivers a much better results and a much more positive long-term result than just hiring on the capability. And unfortunately, the transactional models that I alluded to at the start of the conversation, they tend to focus purely on the capability, and that's what happens. But again, just to be clear, it's not just a recruitment solution. What businesses have got to do is really think very carefully about how do we look after these people when it comes to the organization. So number one driver for people leaving roles right now in the industry is their career development. And that's not necessarily the physical aspect of the career development. It's the lack of clarity. It's the fact that they can't see what their succession plan is because the company hasn't curated that. They haven't developed something. They haven't got a process or a system around it to give the person the confidence that they can see their career growing and evolving within the organization. So there's that career development bit is really important. The communication structures that businesses are doing, that the whole employee value proposition around what it's like to work in an organization has got to be on point, and it has to be in point and ingrained into the business, because if it's not, there are businesses out there who are doing that, and it just gives people, again, the ability to choose a different path.
It's funny because we're talking about life sciences here, but what you're saying, I mean, really should relate to anyone who has a job or a career path in whatever industry. I guess with life sciences, it's just a little bit more serious, a little bit more problematic, because that talent pool is not particularly big and is shrinking for some of the reasons we discussed earlier. Well, I'm very interested to, you've mentioned the transactional sort of traditional models for hiring. I'm trying to think, if I was a CDMO or a pharma company and I'm building a facility and I know that I need 10, 20, 50, 200 trained, talented staff, I could kind of see why they'd just sort of go, let's just palm this off to someone who can find us 200 people. But as you were saying, they're going to miss out on that whole cultural element. They're going to realize that those 200 people that someone's hired aren't fit for their company, aren't going to stay the course. And I want to go back to the retention rates that you mentioned earlier. Did you have a few stats you said, or how much it costs the industry or specific companies?
I mean, it's genuinely eye-watering. I mean, the common stat that gets thrown around is sort of 3.5 times their first year salary is the standard cost that you lose. But without sort of scaring people, it's much, much worse than that. The impact of retention and specifically losing people at the frequency is not just the cost elements, it's the loss of productivity, it's the impact it has on morale in an organization, it's obviously the physical cost of replacing somebody, it's the lost opportunity cost. What happens that when those people are in the business, is there a damage impact that they bring, and that all has a financial value. How much you spend training them, and that money's wasted because they leave. So the cost is horrendous. 2 in 5 is pretty much the average. So 2 in 5, 40%. So if you're hiring,
that's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. So if you're hiring, the example you gave of a couple of hundred people, so if you're going to lose 40% of the 200 people that you hire within the first 18 months, you're going to lose 80 people. It's basically half of the people you've hired will have gone within the first 2 years. That is not sustainable at all.
And it's also, I was reading something about an hour before we jumped on Zoom here about staff shortages are causing absolute slowdown in the cell and gene space, which is really burgeoning, which has so much potential, but it's just being crushed, or it's being crushed at the moment because there isn't enough staff, and staff are not being retained, and projects are just fizzling out almost, and that's not a good sign.
No, it's not, and it's and it is. It's a pandemic. We often talk about
not another pandemic.
Not another pandemic, but this pandemic's been knocking around long before the previous one that we all know about. So it's a huge challenge. This is not something that is unique to this industry, right? It absolutely isn't. Look at the automotive manufacturing industry, traditional combustion engines. All of a sudden, we're all getting electric vehicles, and guess what? There aren't enough engineers and technical people to fuel that particular industry. The oil and gas industry had this 15, 20 years ago. We saw that, where again, aging workforce, people retiring, not enough people going into engineering, and there was this huge gulf where they couldn't cope with the amount of work that was there because the skill wasn't there.
So what lessons can we learn from them, if any? Because obviously they're different industries, but if they've gone through the droughts and they're now seeing great times again.
I think listen, the solution to the problem is not one thing. It's multiple things. So, we've already said investment from a government level globally is essential. Not just in terms of money, but in terms of the resources that they mobilize and they enable to support these initiatives and to support these industries.
And I assume working in unison as well, because there's no point having that sort of ultra competitive element where you don't know what's going on in Europe versus the US and Asia when this is a global workforce.
Well, exactly, and it's a global workforce that's pretty transient as well, right? It moves around, it goes places. So I think if I think about, I went to DCAT in March, I'm at Bio next week in Boston, how many nationalities will be represented at those events? It's a truly global industry that moves around. But I think the input that, as you rightly point out, but I think that's what I mean when I talk about the infrastructure and resources. I think the most important thing those infrastructure and resources can do is actually pull the industries together, different locations, different regions, but then the different elements and aspects of the industry, and then get academia and then get all the supporting sort of networks involved so we can actually understand, well, okay, sound like an engineer here, but do proper root cause analysis and understand where the challenges are, where are the pinch points, what are the things that we can do to alleviate those pinch points, and let's do some real, let's do some innovation sprints, let's do some things that are really going to push the envelope as far as those infrastructures and processes, and let's not be too insular, because I do think we are guilty of being too insular. We're losing people to tech and big data and all that kind of good stuff. Why are we losing them? Let's go and find out what they're doing and how can we transfer that back into what we're doing and really kind of revolutionize. And listen, not everybody in the industry is stuck in their way. There are some really brilliant, innovative, forward-thinking businesses now. I've already alluded to a couple in our conversation. But we need everybody doing that, because if everybody does it, it's going to positively impact the whole thing. And the analogy that I keep sort of saying to people is, we need that pool of people to grow. We don't just want to. The individual agendas are almost secondary here for companies. They need to stop thinking about baking, getting a bigger slice, and start thinking about baking a bigger cake. Because if you bake a bigger cake, I can guarantee your slice will be much bigger than if you just concentrate on getting a bigger slice. And that's what we need to start doing.
Just what happens if we don't? It's a bit of we've been talking about recruitment, or we've been talking about recruitment for years, and there have been schemes, but if nothing really changes, are we seeing all this momentum that's been built up over the past 40, 50 years just collapsing? Are we
listen,
no more drugs? What's going to happen?
I truly believe that, and have confidence that we won't let it get to that point. I generally think, and people might think I'm a bit of an optimist when I say that. Certainly some people who are kind of look at the environmental agendas that we're living in today. Well, we should have taken note of that 30 years ago, because look what we did to our planet, and continue to do to our planet. But I think people realize, and I think in that respect, the pandemic almost sharpened focus for people to really understand the importance of what this industry actually does. I mean, I don't think AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna were household names 2 years ago, whereas they are now. I think, and so I do think there will be things that things will happen, things will be done. But if they're not, listen, worst case scenario, you said the word momentum. Momentum is the problem. We just won't have the momentum necessary to be able to support the industry.
And I wonder, if we look at the efforts of the pharma industry during the COVID-19 pandemic, the fact that they were able to rally together to do it and to produce, I hate using that word, unprecedented amounts of not only vaccines, but new vaccines, new
Yeah,
products.
yeah.
I mean, that shows on the one hand that we can do it, but whereas you're the optimist, I'm possibly the doommonger here. And at the same time, you know, it could be just sort of, it could just show that the industry can just rest on its laurels. And we've done that. We can cope with anything, but really, as the next decade will show, if nothing happens, then that there will be this dearth that sort of spreads across it.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and it's yeah, and we've got to do that. But you know, I'm also, you know, as just, you know, I'm the pessimist here, Dan. So you know, I do think there are enough people talking about this. There are enough people who are doing good things that are different to what we've done in the past to be able to kind of move these things forward and to move the dial and really get us thinking about things in a different way. And I think the more of us who champion it, the more of us who talk about it, the more of us, the more action we'll get, the more momentum we'll get, and the more positive examples of what the benefits are if we do these things. You know, we'll have more examples to talk about. And I think when people see the examples and they see the outcomes that have come from them, you know, I think people will really start to take note of that.
I've got one last area to briefly chat to you about, and that's AI. You know, with at the moment with ChatGPT and everything else going on, a lot of people are worried about their jobs. A lot of people are worried about what machine learning and computers and robots are going to bring to future employment. In many ways, from this discussion, if we could get automation going, if we could get AI, if we can get robotics, we don't need as big a workforce as we probably do now. But in reality, that's a long way off, if ever, is it not, in pharma?
Yeah, I think it's a long way off. You know, listen, I'm a big advocate of the use of technology in our own business. You know, we have a tech stack for a relatively young business, a couple of years old. Our tech stack is more advanced and than many of the businesses that operate in our space that have been around for a much longer period of time than we have. And we've seen the benefits, and we pass those benefits on to the customer ultimately. But I think what we've learned, and I think what we're all learning about AI, machine learning, digitization, is that I'm a firm believer that it doesn't replace the need for people. It enhances and develops and evolves what people do. You know, there's no doubts at all that you know, I've seen artificial intelligence deployed in other areas of manufacturing where it's driven incredibly impressive quality results. It's driven efficiency, you know, to levels that could never be achieved by a human. So it does do that, but what that allows organizations to do is just to kind of allocate resources in a different way, is what I would say. I also think that some of the nuances and some of the sort of really kind of ingrained specific natures of what we do, people can actually enhance AI, and things like ChatGPT, for example. I think, you know, we are all uniquely different, and so I think actually we can use those tools, but our input can actually enhance those tools, if that makes sense. So I don't think it will ever replace us, but I think it will force us to think differently.
Yeah, I mean that kind of tallies with what I've been thinking about as far as AI goes. Everyone's a little bit worried. I do think it's probably the menial tasks or the sort of less qualified jobs that will be the ones that would end up getting replaced. So that doesn't really fix the pharma issue here at all. But
no,
hey,
no,
we'll see what the future brings.
Well, exactly. Yeah. In 10 years' time, this interview could be done by two robots. I don't know.
Holograms.
Two holograms. Yeah, exactly.
But my final question, I think we've
yeah.
covered a lot of ground. We've sort of looked at a lot of the issues that are haunting the issue of recruitment and the problems with the workforce in pharma and life sciences. Andy, lead candidate, we've alluded to it. You've mentioned sort of the difference between you and the sort of traditional recruitment model. How are you able to throw in a pitch. How are you able to fix the world here? How are you able to overcome some of these issues and just sort of spin the industry on its head?
I think the thing that we found, and what we've been able to demonstrate now from the customers that we work with, is there's a couple of things that we've done that has really benefited the people that we've worked with. And the first thing is that we made a really conscious effort to level the playing field. So in more traditional recruitment models, I think there's a real kind of top-down hierarchy. There's the company hiring, there's an agent in the middle, and then there's the guys looking for work at the bottom who candidly are treated a little bit like commodities. And what we've done is level that playing field. So we don't see ourselves as an agent, as it were, but an intermediary, almost a partner to both ends of the value chain. And because we've done that, we seem to have just really represented the interests of both of the parties involved in that hiring transaction in a way that's slightly different to the more transactional models. As a consequence of that, when we're working with an organization, they get a real partner. So they get someone that doesn't just sort of say, here's a job spec, go and find something that fills the job spec. They get someone who says, well, let's understand what your strategy is. Where do you want to go as a business, and how does the talent sort of tie into that? Let's maybe challenge you a little bit to think, well, you think you want to hire X, but we actually think, have you thought about hiring Y and what that might look like? So they get someone who really puts them under some pressure to build a really clear idea about what that talent acquisition needs to be about, and what their talent agenda needs to be about.
And that really fits into the culture idea and
absolutely
the ability to retain that person as well, which we spoke about before.
Absolutely. It's really understanding that and getting to grips with that. And then we actually, to bring some science in, so we use really sort of proven profiling tools that come in. So we build unique profiles. We don't use normative profile assessment. We use ipsative. So we actually create profiles that are unique to a particular business and role, and then we validate people against that rather than a norm group. So what you get is a really close alignment. So we're assessing their capability, but we're also really sort of making sure that they're aligned as people with what this organization is about. And what we've been able to do as a result of that is show that we can deliver new hire retention that's way over 90% consistently. So, you know, the people that we have just don't leave, they stay with organizations, and they flourish and they thrive with those organizations. So in turn, the organization does. So, you know, they get that benefit. I think we look at it as getting a right mix. So we look at lots of different things. So we really bring that hiring strategy to life. We manage their employer branding. We bring a real marketing story to this to the organizations that we work with. So we don't just go in and say, here's a job, you could be interesting. We tell them about the company, about where they're based, what their culture is, and we bring that to life with some really smart marketing. And then we do that really in-depth validation process, so that people get a customer experience at both ends of the value chain that really sets us aside from the other organizations that operate in our space. And that's the things I think really that have delivered that. And I think what we've also been sort of quite proud of doing is paying it forward, but also putting our money where our mouth is. So the first thing we've done is really, we're quite conscious at the minute in particular, there's some pressure on businesses around funding and cash runways, and everything's just sort of stagnating a wee bit. So what we've done is evolve our pricing model. So we've put in a subscription pricing model, and we try and keep the capital outlay really reflective of kind of everybody's worlds right now. So what we can see is that we're 30% more cost effective than most of the transactional models. But again, that retention thing, you know, we're telling people that we can do that people will stay. So what we've done to support that is we've put a warranty structure in place that's a minimum of a year. So if anybody leaves a business within a year of us appointing them, then we will make sure that that problem is solved for the company. So, you know, I've not had to use the warranty structure just yet, but it's there, and that hopefully gives someone the confidence that if they need it, they've got it.
That was every question now is my final question. That was going to be my final question, whether you've used it or not. But that's testament to the model that you're showing here. That you know, no one's
Listen,
metaphorically can come and ask for their money.
Absolutely. The scenario is such that there are always certain scenarios that you can't legislate for, that cultural fit, people's lives change, right? Their partners get a new job and they have to move to a new country, or it just makes it impossible. You can't legislate for that happening. So there is always, we will never, I don't think we'll ever deliver 100%. It won't always be at that level, but
No, but your model allows you to aim
the
high
model
and
allows
give that confidence with the companies.
Yeah, we have, and we have had people. We've had, I can think of one example where someone left within 12 months, and so we simply navigated a solution to make sure that that person was replaced within an expedient time frame, so the customer's inconvenience was minimized. But that was one of those circumstances where there was a entirely unavoidable issue that meant that person had to move and leave the organization. But we mitigated it. We've never had to implement a warranty structure where we've then had to give money back to the customer. We just not had to do it. So something we're doing is working. So I think it's that project approach, partnership led, and all of the elements that bring that into life, I think, are the things that are really just allowing us to stand out from some of the more traditional models.
Well, fantastic, Andy. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Will you promise to keep me updated of any new trends within the recruitment side of the industry? Anything else? Anything that comes along? Anything that you're seeing that really sort of has an impact on the recruitment side as we go forward?
Yeah,
can we do this again in a year, in 2 years?
I think it'll be really interesting, because I think we'll see continued evolution this year. So I think, let's maybe do it again end of the year and see what's happened.
That is, unless the whole industry has collapsed through lack of workers, or through the environment imploding all around us.
Yeah. On that positive note.
I told you, I'm naysayer over here. Andy, thank you so much for talking to me.
Pleasure.
And
really enjoyed it.
As I said, always a pleasure.
All right. Cheers, Dan. Thanks very much.